Commander Jack Franklin sat at his desk on Mars base, his fingers tapping against the cold metal as he watched the security footage for the 5th time. The video showed a peaceful meeting room with 12 humans in formal United Earth Defense Force uniforms. They smiled and extended hands toward tall insect-like creatures with shimmering blue exoskeletons. Then, without warning, the aliens pulled out weapons and opened fire. Jack paused the video at the moment when Ambassador Kelly's face showed his final expression of shock before the blast hit him. Jack had known Kelly for 15 years. Now he was gone, along with almost everyone else on the diplomatic mission. A knock at his office door broke his dark thoughts. "Enter," he said, quickly closing the video file. Lieutenant Susan Wright walked in slowly, her right arm in a sling and a healing cut visible across her cheek. As the only survivor of the massacre, she carried more than just physical wounds. "Sir, Admiral Nelson is ready for our meeting," she said, her voice steady despite everything she had endured. Jack nodded and stood up. "How are you holding up, Lieutenant?" Susan's eyes looked down for a moment. "I'll be combat ready in 3 days, sir." "That wasn't my question," Jack said more gently. "I'll be fine when we make the Xylorians pay for what they did," she replied, meeting his gaze with steel in her eyes. They walked together through the busy hallways of Mars Command. People moved quickly, their faces serious. News of the failed first contact with the Xylorian Empire had spread throughout human space, and everyone knew what it meant. War was coming. The meeting room fell silent when Jack and Susan entered. Admiral Patricia Nelson stood at the head of a large table surrounded by top military officials and scientists. Despite being in her 60s, Nelson stood straight and commanding, her gray hair cut short and practical. "Commander Franklin, Lieutenant Wright, please be seated," Nelson said. "We need to understand exactly what we're facing." Susan placed a small device on the table. A hologram appeared showing the Xylorian ships that had ambushed the diplomatic mission. "The Xylorians let us approach in peace, but it was a trap from the beginning," Susan explained. "During my escape, I managed to scan their ships and weapons systems. Their technology is advanced, but something seemed strange about how they operated their controls." Dr. Alan Garcia, the head of the UEDF Research Division, leaned forward with interest. A young genius with messy hair who rarely left his lab. His presence at this high-level meeting highlighted the seriousness of the situation. "Strange how?" he asked. Susan pulled up another hologram showing the inside of a Xylorian ship she had glimpsed during her escape. "They don't use buttons or screens like we do. They connect directly to their ships through their antennae. Some kind of neural interface." Dr. Garcia's eyes widened. "That could be very important. Lieutenant, I'll need all your scan data." Admiral Nelson nodded. "You'll have everything we have, Doctor. Now, let's discuss what we know about their intentions." A stern-looking intelligence officer spoke up. "From intercepted communications, we believe the Xylorians view all other sentient life as either a food source or competition to be eliminated. They've been watching us for some time, learning our weaknesses. The diplomatic mission was just a way to get close and study our technology before they launch a full invasion." Jack felt his hands clench into fists under the table. "How much time do we have?" "Based on their fleet movements, 3 months at most," the officer replied. Admiral Nelson stood up and walked to the window overlooking the vast Martian landscape dotted with domes and buildings. The first major human colony off Earth had grown into a crucial military hub over the past 30 years. "Then we have no choice," she said. "We must strike first with everything we have." The room erupted in voices, some agreeing, others arguing for more diplomatic attempts. "With all due respect, Admiral," one officer said, "their fleet outnumbers ours 3-1. A direct confrontation would be suicide." Nelson turned back to the room. "That's why we won't fight on their terms." She looked at Dr. Garcia. "Doctor, you have 1 month to find us an edge, something they won't expect." Dr. Garcia nodded slowly. "I might have an idea already. If their neural interface is as integrated into their systems as Lieutenant Wright suggests, it could present a vulnerability." Later that evening, Jack found himself in Dr. Garcia's lab. Screens displayed complex diagrams of Xylorian biology and technology based on Susan's scans. "Look at this," Dr. Garcia said excitedly, pointing to a pattern on the screen. "Their entire weapon system runs on frequencies that match their neural patterns. It's efficient for them, but it means..." "It means what?" Jack asked, trying to follow the technical details. "It means we might be able to disrupt their entire fleet with the right electromagnetic pulse," Garcia explained. "Their neural commands would get scrambled. Their ships would freeze up." "For how long?" "Minutes at most," Garcia admitted. "But in battle, minutes can be everything." Jack nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. "If we could get our entire fleet in position without them detecting us, hit them with this pulse and strike while they're vulnerable." "Exactly," Garcia said. "But developing this technology in a month and finding a way to deploy it across the fleet? It's never been done before." "Neither has facing extinction," Jack replied grimly. "Get whatever resources you need." As Jack left the lab, his comm unit beeped. Admiral Nelson's voice came through. "Commander, report to my office immediately." When he arrived, Nelson wasn't alone. Susan Wright stood beside her, now dressed in full combat uniform despite her injuries. "Lieutenant Wright has volunteered for a special reconnaissance mission," Nelson explained. "We need eyes inside Xylorian territory to confirm their fleet positions before we commit our forces." Susan's face showed no fear, only determination. "I'm the only one who's seen them up close and survived, sir. I should go." Jack wanted to object. The mission would be incredibly dangerous, possibly suicidal, but he recognized the look in Susan's eyes. The same look he saw in the mirror each morning since watching his friend die in that video. "When do you leave?" he asked instead. "Tomorrow," Susan replied. "A small stealth ship. Just me and a pilot." Jack nodded. "I'll help you prepare." As they left Admiral Nelson's office, Jack looked out a viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, an enemy was coming that saw humans as nothing more than insects to be crushed. An enemy that had already killed his friends without hesitation or mercy. "We'll be ready for them," he promised quietly, more to himself than to Susan. "And they have no idea what humans are capable of when our backs are against the wall." Admiral Patricia Nelson stood tall before the United Earth Council, her uniform crisp and her voice clear, despite having slept only 3 hours in the past 2 days. The large chamber was filled with representatives from every human colony: Earth, Mars, Europa, Titan, and a dozen smaller settlements throughout the solar system. Their faces showed fear, anger, and determination in equal measure. "The Xylorian threat is real and imminent," Nelson said, pointing to the holographic display showing the alien fleet movements. "Our intelligence confirms they plan to attack within 60 days. They consider us nothing more than competition to be eliminated. We must act first." A council member from Earth raised her hand. "Admiral, are you suggesting we launch a preemptive strike against a species we barely understand? Maybe the diplomatic incident was a cultural misunderstanding." Nelson's face hardened. She played the recording that Lieutenant Wright had brought back. The room fell silent as they watched the human diplomats die. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. "This was no misunderstanding," Nelson finally said. "I am proposing Operation Thunderstrike, the full mobilization of our fleet to strike at the heart of their forces before they can reach our populated systems." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in the 50 years since the United Earth government formed, humanity would go to war as a single united force. Across the solar system, ships began to move. On the orbital shipyards above Mars, Captain Lisa Reeves walked through the long corridors of the battleship UES Valiant. Workers rushed around her, installing new weapon systems and shield generators. "How much longer?" she asked her chief engineer. Engineer Greg Sullivan wiped sweat from his forehead and consulted his tablet. His hands were stained with machine oil, and his eyes showed the strain of working triple shifts. 24 hours, Captain. Dr. Garcia's new pulse emitters are tricky to calibrate. We've never installed anything like them before." Lisa nodded and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Every minute counts, Greg. This ship needs to be ready. It will be, he promised. The whole crew knows what's at stake. In another part of the ship, pilots gathered in the briefing room. Pilot Dwayne Johnson, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, stood at the front, explaining new flight patterns on a tactical display. The Xylorians fly in tight formations, relying on their neural networks to coordinate, he explained to his squadron. Once Dr. Garcia's pulse hits them, they'll be confused. That's our moment to strike, but the window will be small. These maneuvers need to be perfect. A young pilot raised her hand. What if the pulse doesn't work? Dwayne didn't sugarcoat it. Then we fight the old-fashioned way and a lot of us don't come home. But it will work. I've seen the tests. Meanwhile, at the edge of the solar system, Lieutenant Commander Ben Kelly guided his small stealth ship through the darkness of space. His mission? To place sensor buoys near Xylorian territory and gather final intelligence on enemy positions. His ship systems were running at minimal power to avoid detection, making the cabin cold and dim. Ben checked his coordinates against the star chart. Just a few more hours, and he could turn back. Suddenly, his sensors beeped softly. Something was moving nearby, a Xylorian patrol. He quickly shut down all non-essential systems and held his breath, as if the aliens might hear him through the vacuum of space. The Xylorian ships passed within 1,000 kilometers, close enough for him to see their blue-green hulls through his viewport. They didn't change course. They hadn't spotted him. Once they were gone, Ben quickly placed his last sensor buoy and plotted a course back to the fleet, carrying valuable data about Xylorian patrol patterns. At the UEDF Research Division on Mars, Dr. Alan Garcia hadn't left his lab in 3 days. Coffee cups littered his desk as he ran another simulation of his electromagnetic pulse technology. Come on, he muttered as the computer processed the data. When the screen flashed green with "Simulation Successful," he pumped his fist. In victory. He immediately called Commander Franklin. "Jack, it works, at least in simulation. The pulse disrupts their neural interfaces for approximately 3 minutes and 42 seconds. After that, their systems adapt." "That's our window then," Jack replied. "I'll tell Admiral Nelson. Can we install this on all ships in time?" "The designs are already being distributed to the fleet. It's not pretty. We're basically bolting experimental tech onto existing systems, but it will work." Throughout the solar system, personal stories unfolded against the backdrop of the coming battle. In a quiet corner of the Valiant's mess hall, Sergeant Maria Diaz recorded a message for her twin boys on Earth. "Mom loves you both very much," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll be home before you know it. Keep practicing your math. I want to see those test scores when I get back." She didn't mention that she'd be leading one of the first Marine boarding parties if the fleet needed to capture a Xylorian vessel. Near Neptune, the human fleet began to gather. Over 400 ships formed the largest armada in human history. The massive carriers and battleships were surrounded by smaller destroyers and frigates. Fighter craft zipped between them in practice runs. Aboard the flagship UES Defender, Admiral Nelson and Commander Franklin reviewed the latest reports from Lieutenant Wright's reconnaissance mission. She confirmed the Xylorians have gathered a force at the edge of the Verano system, Jack said, pointing to a star map. "Over 1,200 ships. They're preparing to jump to our system within days." Nelson's expression remained firm. "Then we go to them first. The fleet will be assembled in 12 hours. We jump in 16. Our first real interstellar war," Jack said quietly. "Not exactly how we imagined joining the galactic community." "No," Nelson agreed. "But the Xylorians chose this path when they decided humanity wasn't worthy of respect." She looked out at the assembled fleet, the largest gathering of human power ever created. They're about to learn their mistake. As final preparations were made across the fleet, a lone ship appeared at the edge of their formation. Weapons locked on immediately, but the ship broadcast an identification signal. It wasn't human, but neither was it Xylorian. "Admiral," the communications officer called out. "It's an Aculian merchant vessel requesting to speak with Fleet Command. They say they have important information about the Xylorians." Nelson and Franklin exchanged glances. The Aculians were another spacefaring species that had been mentioned in briefings. supposedly neutral in galactic affairs. "Bring them in," Nelson ordered, "but keep weapons ready. This could be useful, or it could be a trap." The human armada hung in space, poised on the edge of battle as the alien ship approached. The next few hours would determine whether humanity's first major interstellar conflict would end in victory or extinction. The Akulian captain stood before Admiral Nelson and Commander Franklin on the bridge of the UES Defender. He was tall and thin with pale blue skin and 4 arms. His large eyes blinked slowly as he looked around at the human officers. "I am Trader Zex," he said in slightly accented English. "My people have suffered greatly under Xylorian attacks. We watched your diplomatic mission fail. We know they plan to destroy your worlds next." "Why come to us?" Nelson asked, her voice cautious. "Your people have stayed neutral in galactic affairs. Neutrality is no longer an option," Zex replied. He held out a data crystal with one of his lower hands. "This contains the exact formation patterns of the Xylorian fleet in the Veranos system, their shield frequencies, their patrol schedules. We gathered this information at great cost." Jack took the crystal, suspicion clear on his face. "And what do you want in return?" "To watch them fall," Zex said simply. "The Xylorians have wiped out 3 of our colony worlds. We lack the military strength to fight them directly. You humans have that strength, but lack information. Together, perhaps there is hope." After careful scanning to ensure the crystal contained no harmful code, Nelson had the information loaded into the fleet's tactical systems. The data matched what Lieutenant Wright had gathered, but with far more detail. "This could cut our casualties in half," Jack said as he reviewed the new information. "If it's genuine." "We'll proceed carefully," Nelson replied. "But we can't afford to ignore this advantage." Throughout the fleet, final preparations continued. On the UES Valiant, Dr. Alan Garcia worked frantically in a makeshift lab. Captain Lisa Reeves entered, concern on her face. "Doctor, engineering reports your pulse emitters are showing power fluctuations in the final tests. What's happening?" Garcia didn't look up from his work. "A calibration issue. The emitters were designed for smaller ships. Scaling them up for a battleship this size created unexpected interference patterns." "Can you fix it?" Lisa asked. "I have, too," Garcia replied, his hands moving quickly over the equipment. "Without the Valiant's emitters, we lose 20% of our pulse coverage. Too many Xylorian ships would remain operational." In the medical bay, Lieutenant Susan Wright sat on an exam table as a doctor removed her arm sling. "The bone has healed well," the doctor said. "But I recommend at least another week before returning to full combat duty." Susan flexed her arm, ignoring the lingering pain. "We don't have a week. I need to be cleared for the strike team." The doctor sighed, knowing argument was pointless. At least wear the supportive brace during combat. Susan nodded and left to find Commander Franklin. She found him in the tactical center studying the battle plans. "Lieutenant," Jack said when he saw her. "Shouldn't you be resting?" "I'm cleared for duty, sir," she replied, standing straight. "I want to lead the first strike team." Jack studied her face, seeing the determination there. "It will be dangerous. The first teams in will face the most resistance if the pulse doesn't work exactly as planned." "I know," Susan said quietly. "But I was there when they murdered our diplomats. I need to be there when we answer that crime." After a moment, Jack nodded. "Very well. Report to Sergeant Diaz. You'll join her boarding team." 12 hours before, the planned jump to the Veranos system, the fleet held what many quietly called last meal gatherings. In the Valiant's mess hall, crew members sat in groups, talking in low voices and sharing stories of home. Pilot Dwayne Johnson showed pictures of his farm in Ohio. "My parents still grow real corn and soybeans. They think space food is terrible." Engineer Greg Sullivan laughed. "They're not wrong. First thing I'm doing when we get back is eating a real burger, not this printed protein." "When we get back," Sergeant Maria Diaz repeated softly, touching the pictures of her children she kept in her pocket. No one mentioned the other possibility. On the bridge of the Defender, Admiral Nelson recorded her pre-battle address to the fleet. Her words would be transmitted to every ship simultaneously. Men and women of the United Earth Defense Force, tomorrow we face an enemy that believes humanity is weak. An enemy that killed our diplomats without provocation or warning. They expect us to wait passively for their invasion. Instead, we will bring the fight to them. We will show them that humanity will not be bullied, will not be hunted, and will not go quietly. Every person in this fleet carries the hopes of everyone back home. Remember that when the battle begins. Remember what we're fighting for. Nelson out. Commander Franklin watched as she finished the recording. Inspiring words, Admiral. Let's hope our actions match them, Nelson replied. She turned to look at the tactical display showing the fleet formation. Where do we stand with the pulse? Emitters? Dr. Garcia reports the calibration issues are resolved. All ships are now properly synchronized. Nelson nodded, satisfied. And the Acullian information? Integrated into our attack plan. If their data is accurate, we'll emerge from hyperspace directly in the middle of their fleet formation, Jack explained. It's risky. We'll be surrounded. But it also means maximum effectiveness for the pulse. And if it's a trap? Jack's expression was grim. Then we'll likely lose the entire fleet in the first minute. Sometimes victory requires risk, Nelson said. The jump proceeds as planned. Across the fleet, final checks were completed. Weapon systems were armed. Shields were raised to maximum. Fighter pilots sat in their craft ready for launch. Boarding teams like Susan's checked their armor and weapons one last time. In his lab on the Valiant, Dr. Garcia ran a final simulation of the electromagnetic pulse. The numbers were good. The pulse would disrupt the Xylorian's neural interfaces for almost 4 minutes. It would have to be enough. This will work, he told himself quietly. It has to work. 6 hours before the jump, the fleet went to full battle stations. The normal lights dimmed to red throughout all ships. The usual chatter on communication channels fell silent as strict communication protocols went into effect. On the Defender's bridge, Admiral Nelson sat in her command chair, her back straight, her eyes focused on the main view screen. Commander, Franklin stood beside her, datapad in hand with the final attack plan. Fleet reports ready, Admiral, the communications officer announced. Very well, Nelson replied. Begin jump countdown. 6 hours until we make history, one way or another. Throughout the Armada, 500 human ships and their crews prepared to face an alien force 3 times their size. The plan was bold, perhaps even reckless. But as Trader Zex had observed before returning to his ship, humans possessed a quality rare among the stars, the willingness to risk everything when backed into a corner. The greatest gamble in human military history was about to begin. The human fleet hung in the darkness of hyperspace, 500 ships moving as one through the strange dimension that allowed faster-than-light travel. On the bridge of the UES Defender, Admiral Nelson watched the countdown timer reach 0. Exit hyperspace now, she ordered. In an instant, the human armada tore back into normal space, directly in the heart of the Xylorian fleet formation. The maneuver was considered suicidal by conventional military thinking. No fleet had ever deliberately jumped into the middle of an enemy force. On the tactical display, Jack Franklin watched as their ships appeared as blue dots, surrounded by a sea of red, the Xylorian vessels. There were hundreds of them, just as intelligence had indicated. Massive hive ships, each carrying thousands of the insectoid aliens, formed the center of their formation. Smaller attack craft swarmed around them like angry bees. Status report, Nelson called out. All ships present and accounted for, the tactical officer replied. Xylorian fleet is in exactly the predicted formation. They're scrambling to respond to our arrival. Perfect, Nelson said. Execute Operation Thunderstrike. Now. Throughout the human fleet, officers gave the command to activate Dr. Garcia's electromagnetic pulse. On the Valiant, Dr. Garcia himself stood by the main pulse emitter, making a final adjustment before Captain Lisa Reeves gave the order. Pulse. Ready, Captain, he reported. Fire, Lisa commanded. The pulse emitters on every human ship activated simultaneously, There was no visible beam, no dramatic light show, just a carefully calculated electromagnetic wave that spread across the battlefield at the speed of light, targeting the specific frequency used by Xylorian neural interfaces. For a brief moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Xylorian ships began to drift. Their precise formation fell apart as ships stopped responding to commands. Some began to spin slowly, their engines firing randomly. Others simply hung dead in space. "The pulse is working," Jack exclaimed. Xylorian fleet showing signs of complete neural interface disruption. Admiral Nelson wasted no time. "All ships execute attack pattern Alpha. Fighters launch now. Boarding teams stand by." The human fleet sprang into action. Fighter squadrons poured from carrier ships streaking toward the disoriented Xylorian vessels. Battleships and destroyers moved into position, targeting the largest enemy ships with their main weapons. Pilot Dwayne Johnson led his squadron toward a Xylorian command ship. "Remember the plan," he told his pilots through the comm. "Hit their weapon nodes and engine cores. Make every shot count. We have less than 4 minutes before they start to recover." His fighters swooped in, their energy weapons slicing through the suddenly vulnerable Xylorian shields. Explosions bloomed across the alien vessel's surface as critical systems were destroyed. On the Valiant, Captain Lisa Reeves directed her ship toward the largest Xylorian vessel, a massive hive ship that intelligence identified as their flagship. "Weapons locked on target," her tactical officer reported. "Fire main cannons," Lisa ordered. The Valiant's particle beam weapons fired, cutting deep into the Xylorian flagship. Its shields, designed to prevent energy weapons from penetrating, were completely offline thanks to the pulse. In the launch bay, Lieutenant Susan Wright checked her assault rifle one last time as she sat with Sergeant Diaz's boarding team in a heavily armored shuttle. 30 seconds to launch," the pilot called back to them. Susan looked at the Marines around her. Most were veterans, their faces showing the focused calm of experienced soldiers. A few younger ones betrayed their nerves with small movements, checking weapons that had already been checked, adjusting armor straps that were already secure. "Remember," Sergeant Diaz said to her team, "our mission is to secure their central data core. Get in, get the data, get out. The Xylorians will be confused, but they're still dangerous. Don't underestimate them." The shuttle launched, joining dozens of others heading toward different Xylorian vessels. Susan felt the familiar twist in her stomach as the shuttle accelerated, dodging debris from already damaged alien ships. Their target was a mid-sized command vessel that intelligence believed contained strategic data about Xylorian territory beyond the Verano system. As they approached, Susan could see that the ship was drifting, its weapons silent. The pilot guided them toward a docking port. "Breaching in 5 seconds," the pilot announced. There was a loud clang as the shuttle attached to the Xylorian ship. "We have SEAL, go, go, go!" The boarding team rushed through the airlock into the alien vessel. The corridors were strangely shaped, designed for beings with different proportions than humans. The lighting had a blue-green tint that made everything look underwater. Susan took point, her rifle ready. The first Xylorian they encountered was spinning in circles, its antennae twitching wildly as it tried to recover from the neural disruption. It barely noticed the humans before Diaz stunned it with her weapon. "They're even more affected than we expected," Susan said. "Don't get comfortable," Diaz warned. "The pulse effects will wear off soon." They moved deeper into the ship, following the map created from Aculian intelligence. They encountered more confused Xylorians, some completely incapacitated, others beginning to recover. Those that resisted were quickly stunned or neutralized. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, the human fleet pressed its advantage. Commander Franklin coordinated the attack from the Defender's Tactical Center, ensuring that squadrons moved in perfect synchronization to maximize the effect of the Xylorians' temporary vulnerability. Group 7, target the communications array on the hive ship in Sector 4, he ordered. Group 3, move to support the Valiant. They're taking fire from recovering ships. Admiral Nelson watched the battle unfold on the main display. Already, nearly 50 Xylorian ships had been disabled or destroyed. The human fleet had lost only 3 vessels so far, far fewer than the projected casualties. Time remaining on pulse effectiveness, she asked. 2 minutes, 12 seconds until they fully adapt, the science officer replied. Signal all ships, Nelson ordered. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 of the attack involved targeting the Xylorian fleet's command and control structure. Without central coordination, their numerical advantage would mean little. On the Xylorian command ship, Susan's team reached the central data core, a strange, crystalline structure pulsing with light. Set up the extraction device, Diaz ordered. 2 Marines placed a specialized computer against the crystal, designed to copy the alien data formats. Download beginning, one of them reported. Estimated time, 40 seconds. Susan checked her watch. The pulse will wear off in less than 2 minutes. We need to move faster. Suddenly, a loud alarm began to sound throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors. What's happening? Diaz demanded. Susan checked her translator device. The ship's announcing some kind of emergency protocol. I can't translate all of it, but I'm seeing words like self-destruct and honor in death. Diaz's eyes widened. They're going to blow up their own ships rather than be defeated. How soon? Before Susan could answer, the ship shuddered violently. I don't think we have long. Download status? 80% complete, the Marine at the data core replied, his voice tense. Just a few more seconds. Across the battlefield, other Xylorian ships began to explode as their commanders activated self-destruct sequences. The shockwaves rippled through space, damaging nearby vessels. All boarding teams, return to your transports immediately. Commander, Franklin ordered over the fleet-wide channel. Xylorian vessels are self-destructing. Repeat, return to transports immediately. On the command ship, Susan's team grabbed the data extractor as soon as it finished its download. Move! Diaz shouted. Back to the shuttle! They ran through the corridors as the ship's vibrations grew more violent. Parts of the ceiling began to collapse around them. They reached the airlock just as a massive explosion ripped through a nearby section. Everyone in now, Diaz ordered as they piled into the shuttle. The pilot didn't wait for the airlock to fully cycle. As soon as the team was aboard, he detached from the dying ship and accelerated away at maximum speed. Behind them, the Xylorian command vessel erupted in a blinding flash of light. 3 days after the battle in the Verano system, the human fleet gathered near the edge of the system. The ships formed a wide circle around a memorial created from the hull fragments of the 3 vessels lost in the fight. Small lights were attached to each fragment, giving the memorial the appearance of a constellation floating in space. Admiral Nelson stood on the observation deck of the Defender, watching as shuttlecraft carried representatives from every ship in the fleet to the solemn ceremony. Beside her, Commander Franklin reviewed the final casualty reports on his datapad. 28 dead, 53 wounded, Jack said quietly. Far fewer than we expected, but still too many. Nelson nodded. Have the families been notified? Yes, Admiral. Personal messages from ship captains have already been sent. They watched in silence as the memorial service began. The names of the fallen were read aloud, transmitted across all fleet channels. After each name, a moment of silence was observed. When the last name was read, the fleet's ships activated their running lights, creating a brilliant display against the darkness of space. They didn't die in vain, Nelson said. The Xylorian threat has been neutralized. Their entire battle fleet destroyed. Thanks to the pulse and their own self-destruct protocols, Jack added. They chose to die rather than face defeat. After the ceremony, activity across the fleet returned to normal as ships prepared for the journey home. On the Valiant, Dr. A. Garcia worked with a team of scientists to analyze the data recovered from the Xylorian command ship. Captain Lisa Reeves entered the makeshift lab, her uniform still showing signs of the battle. Minor repairs were ongoing throughout the ship, with the sound of welding and hammering in the background. How's the analysis going, Doctor? She asked. Garcia looked up from his screen, his eyes red from lack of sleep. It's troubling, Captain. The Xylorians were ruthless and aggressive, yes, but they weren't acting entirely of their own will. What do you mean? Garcia pulled up a star chart on the main screen. According to this data, the Xylorians were fleeing from something in the galactic core something that terrified them so much they were desperately seeking new territory, new resources. Any idea what scared them so badly? Lisa asked. The data is incomplete, but there are references to a species called the Void Walkers. The translations are rough, but they appear to be a highly advanced race that can manipulate space-time itself. The Xylorians encountered them about 20 years ago and have been running ever since. Lisa frowned. So the Xylorians attacked us because they were desperate? Desperate and following their natural instincts, Garcia confirmed. They saw all other species as either resources or threats. But now I'm concerned about what happens when these Voidwalkers notice us. In another part of the ship, Lieutenant Susan Wright sat in the medical bay as a doctor examined her arm. The boarding mission had reopened some of her healing wounds, but she hadn't reported to medical until after the memorial service. You're lucky it's not worse, the doctor told her. But you need to rest this arm for at least 2 weeks. No arguments this time. Susan nodded absently, her mind on the alien ship she had helped board. Despite all the Xylorians had done, there had been something almost pitiable about them in their final moments. Confused, desperate, choosing death over surrender. The door opened and Admiral Nelson walked in. Susan tried to stand at attention, but Nelson waved her back down. At ease, Commander Wright, Nelson said. Commander? Susan questioned. Your promotion came through this morning, along with a new assignment. Nelson handed her a data pad. Once your arm heals, of course. Susan looked at the pad, her eyes widening as she read. A diplomatic mission? After what happened last time? A different kind of diplomatic mission, Nelson explained. The data you recovered indicates there are other species that have suffered under Xylorian attacks. The Achilleans were just one. The United Earth Council believes this is an opportunity to form alliances before the next threat emerges. And they want me to lead it? You've seen the enemy up close. You helped defeat them. That will earn you respect among these potential allies. Nelson's expression grew more serious. And we may need those allies sooner than we thought. On the bridge of the Defender, Commander Franklin received an unexpected communication request. When he accepted it, the face of Trader Zex appeared on the screen. Commander, the Achillean said, his forearms moving in what Jack had learned was a gesture of respect. I bring a message from the Achillean Federation Council. They wish to formally open diplomatic relations with humanity. That's good news, Jack replied cautiously. But why the urgency? Because you have done what no other species has managed. You defeated the Xylorians decisively. Word is spreading through the nearby systems. Other species are taking notice. Is that a problem? Zex's large eyes blinked slowly. It means you are now seen as a major power in this sector of the galaxy. Some will seek alliance. Others may see you as a potential threat. He paused, and there are whispers from the Galactic Core. Disturbing whispers. Jack thought of the data they had recovered. About the Void Walkers? Zex seemed startled. You know of them already? Then you understand why we must stand together. The Xylorians were merely running from the storm. The real darkness has yet to arrive. Later that day, Admiral Nelson called a meeting of all ship captains. They gathered in the Defender's large conference room, some in person, others attending, via hologram from their vessels. The battle is won, Nelson began. But our mission is far from complete. The data we recovered points to a greater threat on the horizon. Humanity entered this conflict to defend our worlds from the Xylorians. Now we find ourselves in a much larger galactic community, with both opportunities and dangers. She activated the main display, showing the location of Earth and its colonies, then zooming out to reveal dozens of other inhabited systems nearby. The United Earth Council has approved 2 initiatives. She continued. First, Commander Wright will lead a diplomatic mission to these potential allies. She indicated several systems on the map. Second, Captain Reeves and the Valiant will establish our first military outpost beyond our home system here. She pointed to a position near the border of Achillean space. What about the Void Walkers? Captain Reeves asked. For now, we gather information Nelson replied. Dr. Garcia will head a new research division focused on the data we recovered. If this threat is real, we'll be ready. As the meeting ended, Commander Franklin stood alone at the observation window, watching the stars. In just a few weeks, humanity had gone from an isolated civilization to a recognized power in their corner of the galaxy. They had faced their first interstellar enemy and emerged victorious in less than a minute of actual combat. But Jack knew that victory often brought new challenges. The Xylorians had been defeated, but the data they left behind hinted at something far worse approaching from the galactic core. Humanity would need to be ready. Quite a view, isn't it? Admiral Nelson said, joining him at the window. Yes, Jack agreed, though I can't help feeling this is just the beginning. Nelson nodded. It is, but we'll face whatever comes next together. That's what humans do. The fleet began its journey home, carrying with it tales of victory and warnings of dangers yet to come. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger universe. The stars that had once seemed so distant now represented both promise and peril. For Commander Jack Franklin, Lieutenant Susan Wright, and the others who had faced the Xylorians, one thing was certain. This was not the end of their story, but merely the opening chapter.